It's white to play. Do you think this position is a win for white, a win for black, or a draw? If you would like to pause and think through that, then we'll talk about the solution and why it's probably not what you thought. All right, well, if you had a chance to do that, hopefully you came up with the move that you thought was the best move for white, because there's only one winning move for white. That's right. It's actually a win for white, but only if they play the particular move. If they play the wrong move, they will lose. And I would say the most logical move of pushing the pawn actually leads to a draw. So we're going to start with the draw here. If they play a6, with best play, the game should be a draw. And a sample line might go something like this. The bishop gets on that diagonal. The knight attacks it. The bishop retreats. And then white says, okay, I'm going to go over here and take this pawn. And then black says, well, I'm going to start pushing my pawns. And so white will get some sort of a blockade like this. Okay, notice how the king and the knight are kind of blockading the 3 pawns. But the bishop over here is blockading these pawns, right? And then eventually... and again, this is just one sample line, but with best play, this would lead to a draw. You would get something like this, where white actually comes around with the knight, forces black to sacrifice the bishop, gets a queen, but it's too slow. Black also gets a queen, and then we get a draw. There's going to be a couple of checks, and this position is actually a draw. Even if the queens got traded off, white's knight would be able to stop these pawns with the king's help, and black wouldn't be able to win. Okay, so regardless of how you look at it, it's just a draw. Okay, so going all the way back, that's what happens if white just simply pushes the pawn. Now, the other move that you might try is knight to f4. It's kind of like a logical looking move of bringing the knight towards the center. It gives you lots of options of different places that you might want to go with your knight. However, black can simply play bishop to e4, getting control of that diagonal again. And you might get something like this: a6, f5, a7, knight to d3. The bishop can't take because you would get a queen, but black says I don't really need to, plays d6, moves the bishop out of the way, and look at these 3 pawns. They are ready to roll. 3 connected pawns with the assistance of the bishop. It's going to be too much for white to handle, and there's this one idea of bringing the knight over to try to come here, but black could simply play e4, and even though you can come in and attack the bishop, e3, knight captures, e2, knight to b6, and when you get the queen, it is with check, forces the king to move, and there's a couple of ways black could do this. Queen to c3 check is an idea. The king would probably move somewhere, and then the queen's going to basically keep checking until it gets into a favorable position like this, where it can pick up the pawn. Okay, so that was just one example, but you kind of get the idea, right? So the moral of that story, or the point that I'm trying to make, is going all the way back to the beginning position. If you play the move knight to f4 as white, you will lose. Okay, so this is a draw. This is a loss. Knight to f4 is a loss. And the winning move for white, wait for it, is knight to f2. Now, this is actually a pretty logical move. So this is, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you actually saw this. Knight to f2, stopping the bishop from going to that diagonal, right? It makes sense. However, where it gets crazy is when black plays the move bishop to c2, attacking this pawn and basically saying, hey, I don't have to rush to stop this pawn. I have 3 moves. So after we play a6, black says, okay, I'll take your pawn. And then when we play a7, black says, thank you very much. Bishop to d5 stops the pawn, and we have to worry about this, and we have to worry about this, and this, and this, and nothing's really happening over here, right? We are going to lose. So instead of pushing the pawn right here, white has a very clever idea. What is the winning move for white? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is knight to g4, check to the king. King has to go back, and then knight to e3. And what we're doing is saying, you wanted to go to d5 to stop my pawn, but now you can't. I've stopped you from going there with my knight. So black says, not a problem. I'll play bishop to a4, and I'm going to go there next move. So again, if you would like to pause, what is the winning move for white now? All right, if you had a chance to look at that, it's a similar idea. Knight to f5 check. The king is going to move probably to f6. It could go backwards, but that looks pretty risky because then you might, fall into a check from the queen if this ever happens. So black says, okay, king to f6, moving forward, supporting my pawns, and also attacking the knight. So we move back to d4, and now we can see the idea. We wanted to control the c6 square so the bishop can't stop us stop our pawn, right? If black plays bishop to c6 now, we're just going to take it. And then we're going to push our pawn, and we're going to get a queen, all right? However, now black could try a couple of things here, and so I'm going to give them to you one at a time and then see if you can find the winning sequence. If black plays the move king to e5, attacking our knight, what should we play? There's only one winning move. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, this one's actually pretty easy. You just push the pawn because we don't care if he takes our knight because we get a queen. And even though, yes, there's a bishop and a bunch of pawns, the queen is very powerful. The king is going to be able to, we're going to be able to put the king in check, take the pawns, and eventually lead to a winning position. Okay, it's not really that difficult. If you were tempted to say knight to f3 check, this is the wrong move because now the king simply moves, attacks us again, and next move they're going to be able to play bishop c6 and stop our pawn. Okay, so that was a big mistake. So that's not a big deal. On e5, if you would like to pause, this one's pretty easy, but how do we win? Well, if you had a chance to do that, it's the exact same idea. We push the pawn. We don't even care, right? We just push it. If they take, we get the queen. Same thing, right? Now, the very tricky line is what do we do if black immediately goes for the pawn race and plays the move b3? It's white to play and win. What is the winning move? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, first things first, we cannot take the pawn because black simply takes our knight and we don't have enough time. Black is in time to stop our pawn, right? That's not going to cut it. So what we need to do against b3 is keep pushing forward and get the queen. Now, you might be saying, well, how does this help us? Because black's also going to get a queen, right? And then isn't this going to be a draw, kind of like you mentioned before? Not quite. What does white play here? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the crazy move is queen to h8 checkmate. That is checkmate. Look, I don't think I've ever seen a checkmate like this before. You've got the queen coming across with the knight, with the king and the pawn, and then black's own pawns. It's the funkiest looking checkmate, and yet here we go. Game is over, all right? So you might have been tempted to say, you know, you take over here. This is probably just going to be a draw because black has a bunch of pawns. The queen's going to start putting you in check. If you can even get out of the checks, you still have to deal with all the pawns. Most likely a draw. So you had to see the one move checkmate, but it's a beautiful checkmate. And if you imagine, remember earlier when the king went to f6, if it would have went backwards, well, it would have been check from the queen that way as well, right? So regardless of how you look at it, it would have been a win for us, all right? So that's kind of the clever idea behind how we win this position. Just to summarize what happened there, we had to continually prevent the bishop from going to that diagonal, starting out with knight to f2, and then by dancing around with the check to come over to e3. So we stopped it here. So that's the second time. So we did like this. And then the third time, we did it like this, right? So it was like boom, boom with the check, then back here, then boom with the check, and then back here. Every time the point was to stop the bishop. So pretty cool pattern there. And then also we had the really nice finish at the end with the queen h8 checkmate. So I wanted to share that one with you guys. Actually lost the information on whose puzzle this was. So I'm not sure where I got it from, but I thought it was cool when I looked at it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. So as always, stay sharp, play smart, and take care.